And now we'll turn the program over to our program chair, Dean Weiss.
Thank you, John. Well, for those I didn't introduce myself to today, if you've just shown up, I'm Dean Weiss, retired from BNSF Railway, and I'm very proud to see my colleague Todd lay out what we accomplished there. We've had a few mobility issues here. We had Travis from Airbus is delayed. We hope he'll be here later. But ironically, an Airbus guy got delayed because of the French airport strikes. I would have sent that new supersonic and just had a private jet supersonic that we have here at AGS if we had it, and he would have been here by now. We also have a mobility issue with our panel here. You'll see the three of us. I'll introduce the other folks in a minute. But Rod Case is also, he has an immobility problem. He's flat on his back. Seeing a chiropractor today stuck in Toronto. So I'll be covering for Rod, and that'll give us more time with Q&A. And also there's a couple people in the audience who are real experts in the freight arena, and I may call on you rather than vice versa to answer some questions. But I'm going to do a quick overview of what is the supply chain, what's the scope of it, really more about freight. And then we'll turn it over to where's automation going for shipping, for rail, and most importantly for trucking, because like the passenger stories you heard about yesterday, trucking is going to be the real next big dynamic for automation. It's going to be quite disruptive in many ways. You've heard about 3 to 4 million truck drivers. What are they going to do? We'll talk about that. And then we'll turn it over to Shailen Bhatt. Shailen is the head of Colorado DOT. Thanks for coming all the way from Colorado. So he's going to say, hey, when I think about all this automation, he's done a lot of thinking about it, what does it mean for a region like Colorado? And then we'll go way off into the futuristic part, which I love the mind-bending topics we have here. And Bruce Upbin will talk about Hyperloop. And it's actually a very specific Hyperloop. It was Hyperloop 1, and now, as of last month, it is Virgin Hyperloop 1 with the investment from Richard Branson, who, by the way, in 1984, as I did this yesterday, we're 33 years away from 2050, but we're 33 years ahead of when Branson started Virgin Atlantic Airways. So there's some what do we call that? Symmetry to that whole discussion. And we'll hear more from Bruce about what that means. And there are other Hyperloops too, which he won't want us to talk about, but we will anyways. What's regional mean? So we have these different geographies. We did cities yesterday. We did airspace, the skies this morning. I found that with some of my geography colleagues, region has a meaning of continents, and you heard Parag talking about regions. But what we're talking about here is regions is really the non-intra-city. This is the intercity movement of people and our stuff. So it's intercity within continents, and it's also intercontinental travel and we'll stay away from the airspace, but we'll talk about water a little bit. We'll talk about certainly the land activity for both intercity and intercontinental. Freight and passenger, we'll look at all modes as much as we can. And that word new models, that's Hyperloop, and anything else we want to talk about. Shailen may have some other ones. And just to put a point on it, yesterday I started with Chris showing all the cities that we'd been to. I think we had 13 or 14 cities. We put up the Google Maps. Of course, we sort of timed it. We put up all the rush hour maps, and they were all red. And we say, we got a mobility problem today. We have the US population is going to grow by 70 million by 2050. World population is going to grow by 2.2 billion. So there will be more travel with more people with more money, and we got some issues, not just in cities, but between cities. Also, US freight volume, because and this theory may change, we have more, with more money, we all have more stuff. The freight volumes in terms of ton miles is expected to grow as well. So that's sort of the challenge. We'll talk about it quickly. So I want to level set you, since most of you aren't freight people, and there's a little bit of basics about the supply chain I'd like to talk about. So there's the US supply chain. It represents about 9% of our GDP in the US, and it varies quite a bit around the world because there's different challenges. China, for example, is 20% of GDP is just getting their stuff to and from the population centers and the ports. Of course, they've invested heavily to start driving that down, and that creates a competitive situation for who's got the most competitive supply chain. We in the US have the most competitive supply chain because we put the most infrastructure in. We now face some challenges because if you look at the scorecard of our infrastructure, from roads to bridges to canals to highways, the grades are going down every year because we're not investing as we should. So we have a challenge there, and Shailen knows this inside and out. Lots of jobs associated with it, and it's a big piece of the economic activity. Prague mentioned it's hard to separate out. But here's a little map. These are the basic modes, and you see that the red blood cells there is the rail business. That big heart in the middle is coal, and that is changing. That heart is shrinking because of renewables, growth of renewables, and also the very competitive growth of natural gas. So coal is being reduced. It was 50% of U.S. Power generation, most of it from Powder River Basin. By the way, Jimmy Carter said, we must have this coal to support the Clean Air Act. So that was actually a government policy to get that started 40 years ago. You can see the darker red is the highway system, and the blue in the U.S. is fairly limited. That's the waterway system, pretty much the Mississippi, the Ohio, Missouri. What we don't show is the intercoastal. So that's kind of the map. Huge density in the east, and that big piece in Wyoming, Powder River Basin coal. Most people don't realize this. I have a lot of friends, I live in Boston now, a lot of friends, they go over and they say, why don't we have a rail system like they have in France? Get to the TGV. And I say, well, a lot of reasons, but one reason is the US rail system is actually designed to do the heavy lifting. You see it on this chart. 40% of all ton miles, which is the measure of work, it's also the measure of how much infrastructure you have to maintain, is from rail. In Europe, it's only 15%. So we've actually, by design, or maybe not by so much policy design, have a rail system that's really there to haul freight. And it's not so good at hauling passengers like it is in Europe with high-speed rail. And we can have a lot of talk about that. But we also have bigger distances as well. So it's actually a good thing that we keep the heavy stuff off the highways, and as taxpayers who pay for highways, we're not covering moving the coal and the chemicals and so much on the highways. The railroads, by the way, pay almost 100% of their infrastructure out of their own pockets, privately held. Truck is very, very significant. We'll talk about truck. If we look at this in terms of dollars, truck is much bigger dollars because they haul higher value goods. But that's the basic pie chart of the different modes that haul freight in the U.S. It will vary around the world. You have to look at it by distance, and truck typically is doing the shorter distances. Rail is doing the longer distances, so the red is truck. And if we look, these are, again, ton miles, which is the measure of work. If we just did number of truck shipments, over half of all trucks actually move under 100 miles. So you'll hear that's very important as we think about the conversion from internal combustion, diesel, basically for truck today, to electric. And we'll talk a little bit about, I don't know if you stayed up late for it, but Elon Musk unveiled the Tesla semi-truck last night. And we've got some of the stats there. By the way, is Andrew Hawkins here? Andrew? Okay, Andrew is an expert on this. He's with The Verge, excuse me, and he can fill us in some more details. The green is the rail carload, which is everything that you think about: boxcars, hopper cars, coal cars. The other slice of rail, which is the fastest growing, is the yellow, which is intermodal. That's when you put a trailer or container on a rail car, and that tends to be very, very attractive at the longer hauls. So you see the bigger slices at the longer hauls. So you have to really look at distance, not just the single pie chart. I'm bringing this up because as we start these transformations and as they accelerate faster in one mode than the other, it will change the competitive dynamics, and you may feel it in your pocketbook if things start to shift from railroads to highways, or highways to railroads, or waterways and so forth. So the dynamics going forward over the next 20 years are going to be fascinating as automation kicks in and makes various modes cheaper and faster. Just by comparison, when we look at passenger, we did say we're going to talk about intercity passenger, which of course in the US is still primarily automobile and air. But if you take the probably most effective corridor for rail, which is the Northeast Corridor, of course Amtrak has the high-speed service, the Acela service, at least between New York and Boston. If you think about that's their best lane, they still only have 6% of the market there. They're ahead of air in those markets. But bus is actually still very viable, and I'm sure Shailen has some comments on bus versus rail as well. But if we did this pie for all markets, intercity rail is very, very small. It's dominated by air, obviously at longer distances, and auto at shorter distances. that's the perspective. Just a few more things on rail, since people don't seem to have a lot of people say, are the railroads still in business? Or we even had a secretary of EPA 10 years ago say, aren't those railroads owned by the government? No, they're not. So the U.S. rail system is actually came out of a very, very bad time. Actually, 1984, again, the Rock Island came out of bankruptcy. It was completely out of bankruptcy, which meant it didn't exist after that. So bad period of bankruptcies, deregulation in 1980, and now it's a very viable system. Warren Buffett proved that when he bought BNSF in 2010, saying that this is a bet on the future of America. And the railroads are in the best shape they've ever been. They haul most of the fossil fuels, which is, there's a yin and a yang. They're the most energy efficient mode, but they haul the kind of the highest carbon fuels. Coal, of course, which is going down, and also crude by rail, which is a new development that's had its ups and downs, but basically was replacing, the railroads were there to haul it when the fracking started in North Dakota particularly, and then into Texas, because the pipeline network was not there. As that pipeline network gets built out, there's been some shift back. But another one is that most of the automobiles move on a rail car in the US, including Teslas, by the way. Teslas will be loading and unloading themselves very, very quickly. So that's a quick overview. I want to talk about just some very quick highlights on what's the outlook for automation for the water, the shipping, water transport, rail, and truck. And the truck is, again, the most interesting. Before I do that, we've heard about this a couple times. People mentioned the SAE designations of level 0 to level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with 5 being driverless, 0 being what we have today. And I think I actually looked at this a lot, and that's more confusing than it needs to be. And I will give a lot of credit to Alan Kornhauser, who runs an excellent little blog called smartdrivingcars.com, to say, hey, really it's about three levels. Let's think about 3 levels, and let's tie it to what the outcomes are. So the first level is really something we should just call safety. It's a safer vehicle. And it started with seat belts. It went to, we have a lot of controls already over the last 20 years, airbags and so forth, make drivers safer. Well, the new digital stuff is just extensions of collision avoidance. And frankly, you will get most of the safety benefits if you just go to that level of automation. So we're not talking driverless, we're not talking comfort for drivers, we're just making the car smart enough to override the stupid driver. And we have this big opportunity of 1.2 million deaths worldwide, 40,000 US, which have gone up, by the way, because of distracted driving in part. And you can get most of that safety benefit from just picking the stuff that makes a difference. And the insurance companies are looking this inside now. And someday they will actually give you a discount for having it, like they did for airbags and security systems and so forth. The next level is really making the driver more comfortable, and this is what we have in a Tesla or a good Mercedes today. You have to keep your hands on the wheel, but you can basically let your mind wander a little bit until something flashes, and then you have 4 seconds to do something, and that's probably too late. But that's really what we would call self-driving. And watch very carefully how the automakers back away from driverless. You already heard it from Ford saying, they're all bragging, I can do driverless from this year, that year, and I'll be driverless. And they say, hey, wait a minute. That means transportation as a service, which was we heard yesterday from Jamie Arbib. That means less production of automobiles. Because if we go to fleet-based, shared driving, autonomous, we don't need so many cars. We'll go from a 5% use of our cars, because it sits in the driveway the rest of the time, to 50%, 60%. And because of that, you'll see the automakers say, I just want to make it more comfortable for my folks that like to buy my car. So keep an eye on that. And so I have a question mark there, because the social benefit, we think of 4 social benefits we'd like to see by 2050. Safety dramatically improved, reducing a major cause of death and injury. Sustainability with electric, if we also can convert the generation to renewables. Capacity reduction, because we'll put more people into a car, we'll have people more comfortable with shared vehicles. And then also, probably most important is just improving the accessibility. I'm 63, when I'm 93, I want to just think, and the Uber shows up, right? And if I have too much to drink, I can do that today with Uber. So the disabled, whether inebriated, elderly, kids going around, and certainly in the third world countries, the accessibility that comes with the full autonomy, the driverless, those are the social benefits. So we get that only when we get to driverless. That's the biggest leap and the hardest leap. So I hope that's helpful. I'll use that again as we go through these freight modes. So shipping. Ships, as you may know, are just massive now. The biggest container ships, early container ships 50 years ago, 6 years ago when they started, were only about 1,000 containers. Now the largest ships are 21,000 containers. You don't need a big crew, so you need maybe 15 people. So the automation value of eliminating those jobs is not as big because of the cost per crew member for when you have 21,000 is just very small. But you can do it. It's a forgiving environment when you're out in the ocean sea. You don't have to stay in your lane too much. And the technology is certainly there. The bigger opportunity long-term would be to actually, as you don't need crew, you could actually reduce the human factor design on a ship and get more capacity on a ship. But this will take a long time. I would think we'll see a lot of automated shipping by 2050, but it's going to take a while to convert that fleet. There's a lot of overhang. There's way too much capacity in container shipping, for example. So keep an eye out for it, but it's more of a fun thing to watch. It's not going to be so disruptive in the next 5-10 years for shipping. For railroads, railroads have an endless opportunity because they're big bureaucracies, they're very complex systems to continue to improve things, and technology is a major driver. The one that is showing the most promise is something that was really forced on them by Congress called positive train control. Positive train control is being implemented now. It'll be fully implemented across the US by 2020. It's basically crash avoidance. So trains will know where other trains are and they will not hit them. If the engineer is going too fast, it will slow it down and stop it. They will designate work groups, so we have a lot of people working to fix the railroad, and we need to wall them off, so geofence them, they won't hit the work groups. But they will still hit you if you're driving through the crossing, because the train cannot stop in less than a mile. So positive train control does not mean you can try to beat the train. Don't do it. And keep your seatbelt fastened. But that will mean ultimately you'll be able to reduce the train crews. So train crews today are 2 people by law, or by agreement, I should say, by agreement, three in switching operations. PTC will give enough confidence to enable reducing that to 1, maybe 0. And France actually is leading the way. The French railways, SNCF, will have a plan to go to 0 people in their crews within several years. It also enables a much better signaling system. Won't get into the details, but that will allow, it'll be able to increase capacity. So it will solve both cost, operating cost, and capacity. This will be over 5-10 years. Be able to automate terminals. We're seeing that now in marine terminals and in ocean terminals. We move a lot of crews around. So the rail crews are very regional, and they go on a trip from A to B, from Denver to Salt Lake, let's say, and then they got to take a bus back or a cab back. So we can, with autonomous trucks or shuttle buses, there's automation there, obviously. There's a lot of robotics that's being looked at for inspections inside the shops that fix the equipment, and a huge set of opportunities for robotics. 3D printed parts, not so much. This is where if you're out in a location and your shop needs a widget for the locomotive, could you print that rather than having an inventory? Maybe, but not such a big deal. And then augmented reality is something as well. So you put it all together, and my summary is the railroads are going to have to crank up the process here, the speed to do this, because they face a very, very severe competitive threat from the trucks who may be able to move equally fast in productivity. So let me tell you about the trucking. So this is where autonomous trucking, we heard a lot about autonomous cars, shared, automated, and electric. This is really just mostly about the automated side. So it'll happen in 2 ways. First will be platooning, I'll tell you what that is, and then full driverless. Ultimately, when you get to full driverless, you will cut the cost of trucking in half. And the reason is not because you just get rid of the driver. It's because the truck can now go 24/7. Right now, if you're in a truck, you have to stop for 10 hours and rest by law. And so you're only moving half the time. Take the driver out, and or have a robot driving while the driver's sleeping. You now have 24/7 operation. So reduce the labor cost, increase the utilization, fuel advantage, and speed. That creates a very, very scary competitive threat for the railroads. Not going to happen tomorrow. I don't think it's going to happen for some time before 2050 for sure. So the railroads have this window of they better move quickly to try to keep up with this productivity gain. So let me tell you about platooning. Who knows what platooning is? Okay. Who knows? You watch the Tour de France, you see the bike riders all nose to tail. They're drafting. That's called the peloton. Same idea. It's basically tailgating. But this is now digital tailgating, and it's there to save fuel. So here's what it looks like. It's now a set of automation of including the componentry in the trucks. You have to have very good braking systems, but the trucks now stay 30. If you just stay 30 feet apart, you can save an average of about 8% fuel. So the trick is to using the cloud, and it's sort of like an Uber-like system. With Peloton is actually the leading company. Get those two trucks together. They may be one company like UPS, or maybe multiple companies. Line them up, and you start saving fuel. And it's really, I call it the gateway drug for automation, because they'll do it very carefully. They don't want to upset us as passenger drivers. And they'll only do two. And they'll be very, very courteous. So if they sense you coming up on the right side, you want to get off, they will open up. They will split up, and you can get through. So they're going to not disrupt the passenger vehicle. But you start doing these pairings, and you're going to get what's going to happen. Well, after a while, that second driver is basically looking at the back of a truck. And now, guess what? They're probably playing video games. Well, maybe we could have them do customer service. Maybe they're going to take a nap. Before long, that second driver becomes a de-skilled position, a trainee for life, so to speak, and ultimately could be taken out when we feel it's safe. So you might have one platoon leader driving the first truck, and then we can start adding trucks. And this is where it starts to, we'll get comfortable with that as a society, and we'll see that ultimately migrate to where everything is autonomous. I guess I should go back here too. So the path of least resistance is start with safety features, because the platooning actually has a lot of good safety features, good braking. Save fuel, and it's a good payback. Start in rural areas. So in contrast to the passenger vehicles, automation will start in rural areas on the interstates at night, minimum convoys, long haul. And guess what? That's where the railroads compete with them. So that's where you're going to see. So instead of the shift from the urban fleets for passengers spreading out to suburbia, and we talked about the gaps in the rural areas where there won't be viable for automated passenger vehicles, the trucks are going to go the other way. So interesting to watch how those two things transpire. Platooning, by the way, Peloton, the leading company, is starting with big fleets like UPS, FedEx. They expect to have their first pilot going the end of this year. We'll see if they make that from between Dallas and Houston. And they're working it through the legislative process to get states to accept it. Shailen can comment on Colorado, I'm sure. So that patchwork will change. The colors will be more and more open. Many states don't have issues with platooning today. And then as we go automated, driverless, I talked about the value there. This is just a kind of the hit parade of which different companies are doing it. You know, Waymo is the name for Google, which is doing trucking. The one that got the most press was this truck handling the beer in Colorado. And again, this comes back to Shailen. You can see he's been the progressive guy here to make this happen. What they don't show, Shailen, is if we zoomed out, there are like 10 of your state troopers around this vehicle, right?
And me.
And you, yeah, good. So he was like biting his fingernail, hoping this thing worked. But of course, that company, which was Uber's auto company, is into a very big legal battle with Waymo, and we'll see what happens there. There's many other companies, but basically it's sensors and software to automate the trucks. And the implications, when we get to that, and we all got to be, what's the day where people say, I feel safe with this, I trust it, will be a big shift in the competitive modal economics. So, big announcement last night. Elon Musk, who has read about it? Elon Musk announced the Tesla Semi. And there's a cool picture of it. He drove it out. He kind of took the fun out of it, because I was watching for that, and then he says, "What's inside the truck?" And he pulls out the new fastest production car. So he sort of took the steam out of the truck. But the new car, the new Roadster, is 0 to 60 in 1.9 seconds. So I'm sure Chris Tucker is going to be getting that soon. But here's the stats on the truck. It's fascinating. And this is down below. So you have, got to read my own writing. The range was a surprise. People thought it'd be 200 miles. The range is 500 miles, which is quite important. 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. I think I might become a truck driver. That could be kind of fun. 1 million mile life. We heard that from Jamie Arbib yesterday that Teslas, I think, are already, or electric cars. The Bolt is another good one. 500,000 miles. Well, Tesla is actually going to guarantee a 1 million mile life. Fueling when you load or unload or when you wait. So don't have to stop for fueling for 15 minutes. You'll recharge at recharging stations. And they put in the all-in cost at 25 cents lower than diesel, which they didn't provide any evidence of that. The one big question they did not address, which I think, Shailen, maybe you know details, we'll find out more, and if Andrew shows up, he'll tell us. What's the weight of this battery? If it weighs 10,000 pounds, which is what people expect, that takes about a quarter of the payload away. And no one's really going to be that interested. So trucks are limited now to 80,000 pounds across the US, gross vehicle weight, includes the weight of the truck, the trailer, and the cargo. That nets out to about 45,000 pounds today of payload of cargo. If you throw in an electric truck with an extra 10,000 pounds, you cut that payload from 45 to 35. It's going to be a tough game. So it probably will be more likely it'll be in shorter hauls where you can fuel at night. And of course, there'll be great emissions benefits from that as well. But again, Elon Musk seems to be behind so many of these exciting innovations like Hyperloop. And here he is again, kind of launching a new industry. It's a great game changer we're seeing happen here. So keep an eye on these things. Again, the modal, as I think about it, the modal competitive position, truck, rail, ocean, ports, is going to shift. And back to Parag, ports serve certain purposes around the world because of how well connected they are in the supply chain. The US farmer who makes soybeans and corn is dominating the market into Asia because we have a phenomenal supply chain. Brazil and Argentina do not have phenomenal supply chains. As those change, as different countries adopt automation to their benefit, the competitiveness of regions will change and supply chains will change. So this is going to be a whole pattern that unfolds over the next 33 years. So I'm going to go through, Rod Case, as I mentioned, sent me a beautiful set of slides. I don't think I can do justice to them, so I'm going to just quickly flip through these and get on with our other speakers. So these will be in your decks. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Catching all that? That was my Ignite talk. And
Poor Rod.
Poor Rod. Those will be available to everybody as well. So I guess, can we load up, Shailen, you want to tell us, maybe you have a few comments about some of the things that I talked about. The beer truck.
Yeah. Nothing like watching 55,000 pounds of beer and your career go down the interstate at 60 miles an hour. It was very exciting. It's interesting on the...
excuse me, I don't
Please?
think I introduced you correctly. Did I?
You said my name right.
That's good. I get points for that. But Shailen is the head guy at Colorado DOT, and I know a lot of the DOT leaders, as I'm on the executive committee and TRB, and he is definitely one of the most progressive guys. So glad you're here. But he's also in transition to a really exciting job as CEO of ITS America, which is, you can tell us about that as you go as well. So
Sure. Yeah. So it's the Intelligent Transportation Society of America, all about technology and how we use that to how we leverage technology to improve transportation for folks. And I will be the CEO and president of ITS America starting December is my soft open. I'm calling December my soft open. As I move, January will really hit the ground. Need a few seconds. Okay, so I'll just talk.
Tell us about the beer.
So yeah, I'll talk about the beer in a second. Thank you. There we go. So how many of you have been to Colorado? Right. So beautiful, beautiful, beautiful state. I think that this whole idea of geography 2050 and the future of mobility, it's a really important topic. And as I sit here and contemplated what I was doing, the sheer absurdity of what we're talking about and trying to prognosticate out 35 years is really humbling to me. And I'm not taking shots at the people who try and do it. I'm just saying, from my career, in 2005, I was a deputy executive director with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. And ITS, Intelligent Transportation at that time, meant these big signs on the highway that would tell you that there's a delay 10 minutes ahead, right? And wow, was that cool. And then in 2009, I was an associate administrator at the Federal Highway Administration, and ITS meant, and I got this connected vehicle demonstration, and it was a GM product in Michigan, and it would shake the steering wheel or shake my seat if I tried to merge into a lane where there was a vehicle in that lane, right? That's 2009. In 2014, I went to the ITS World Congress in Detroit, and they put me in a Honda, and they put me on I-75, and the driver went like this. And as every type A type person, I was like, whoa, that's aggressive. And then in 2000, right? I'm that guy. And then in 2016, I was following at 55 miles an hour while a bloody autonomous truck went down the highway at 100 miles at 55 miles an hour with no driver in the seat. So in the span of a decade, we've literally transformed what it could mean. So therefore, as I sit here and try to prognosticate out to 2050, I would just say that the only thing I know about what I'm telling you is that I'm wrong, right? I'm just an early adopter of being wrong. I have been appointed by 3 governors, 1 president, to do transportation from a public sector side across the country. I think a DOT exists to save lives and make people's lives better. And I include this slide because technology is the greatest tool in our toolbox around saving lives and making people's lives better, right? So we have a 21st century challenge in Colorado, and I'll talk about that in a second. But when I get to Colorado, is anybody here from Colorado? Right? So if you're from Colorado, so if you go to Colorado from New York and you experience the traffic, you'll be like, not that bad, right? Or from LA or somewhere else. If you are from Colorado, oh my God, traffic is terrible, right? Where I used to go for an hour, now it takes me 2 hours. Where I used to go to the mountains on the weekend, I had this one guy who was a contractor, and he told this story to this group, and he was like, we have a grave tragedy in our generation. My kids will not experience the mountains the way that I did, because now, instead of getting up at 9 a.m. and being on the lifts, now they have to get up at 6 a.m. to get on the lifts. And I was like, I don't think this word tragedy means what you think it means. You know, I think there's other tragedies out there. But this is the mindset of people in Colorado. And they ask me, why is traffic so bad in Colorado? It's because we have a system that was designed in the 50s, built in the 60s for a population of the 1980s. So, and they got that right. There were 3 million people in Colorado in the 1980s. There's 6 million people there today. They're going to 8 million people in the next 20 years. And I cannot widen every highway so that everybody can be in a single occupant vehicle. And safety, 36,000 fatalities on American roadways last year. Think about that. I am part of a system that we engineer to kill 36,000 people every single year, and we accept it. If somebody showed up with the technology tomorrow and said, hey, got this great thing, it'll kill 36,000 Americans, but imagine all the benefits, we'd say go away, right? Like if they showed up with tobacco tomorrow, we'd be like, go away. So that's why the safety focus and how do we make people's lives better. So this happens with this slide. So I'm just going to talk about RoadX. So if you go and talk to most of your DOTs, what do? We for 100 years have been replacing and repairing roads and bridges, right? And what we did when I got to Colorado is I said, we can't just take a traditional approach. We created this thing called RoadX. We just hope that the SpaceX folks wouldn't sue us. Did put a lot of money into marketing, but we said, we're going to become the #1 state in the country around adopting new technologies in order to operate the system more effectively. And I'll just talk quickly through some of these, and I'll yield my time back to the Q&A. But my first day, or my first week on the job, I walk into the auditorium, and there's this delegation from Australia there. And this guy's speaking, and he goes, yeah, we saw a 40% reduction in congestion. And I thought it was a language barrier because he's speaking Aussie, right? So I said, did you say 4? And he goes, no, mate, 40% reduction. And I was like, what are you talking about? So we call it Smart 25. Again, not a lot of money in marketing, but they have this managed motorway concept whereby they use an algorithm called Superhero, and they know the amount of storage for all of the lanes on the highway. They know the velocity of the traffic on the highway, and when the speed starts to come down, they stop letting vehicles onto the highway. So you never lose your most important, highest value roadways. They saw a 40% reduction in congestion when they did it. I said, we're going to do that. We're going to do it now. And I remember one of the staff was like, well, we're just sort of studying it, and that's not how we do things. And I was like, no, this is how we do things now. And we're going to do it. So we're going to go live with that. Now, Americans don't follow traffic rules like Australians do. But if I see a 20% increase on this 18-mile stretch of I-25, that is the equivalent of me adding a lane. We're going to do this for $8 million. If I added a lane on that 18-mile stretch, it would probably cost me $500 million if I could even get the real estate. So operating the system is going to be much more efficient. Here and Panasonic are working with us right now around big data. How many of you have heard of big data, right? Big data, big data, big data. I don't need big data. I'm swimming in an ocean of big data. I need big information, right? How do I actually take the fact that an airbag deployed on the highway, which means that vehicle is not going anywhere, and how do I, through V2V, which is vehicle to vehicle, and V2I, vehicle to infrastructure, and V2X, communicate that back down the line so that the person who's 100 meters away doesn't crash into that vehicle, and then 2, the person who's starting their trip in Denver to get up in the mountains so they don't navigate into that chokehold, and we're gonna get there on that. You heard about the auto self-driving truck. So when I created RoadX, I said, go out there and get the private sector ideas that are out there, and we'll create a safe place for them to deploy it because we'll save lives and we'll make people's lives better. So they come to me and they're like, auto, you know the auto truck? I was like, yeah, the auto truck. They're like, it's gone across the country in autonomous mode. I was like, perfect, I love it. They're like, they want to do a test to go 100 miles on the interstate in Colorado. I was like, love it, this is exactly what they do. And they're like, one small hitch, they want the driver to be in the sleeper berth, not in the driver's seat. And I was like, yeah, they should do that in Michigan. And the reason being is that if this had gone wrong, right, in the public sector, this could have generational impacts on employment. My daughters might not work, right? Because in my mind, what would happen, right? That autonomous vehicle goes across the median, hits the family in the church on the way to in the minivan on the way to the church retreat, and then does a 180 and runs into the legislature, right? But we chose to do it because in fact, we took a lot of heat for this. Why would you put a autonomous truck on the road with people? And I was like, I promise you that the night that we did that test, and we had a bunch of state troopers around it, I promise you that night there was a truck on the road that the driver was under the influence, was sleepy, was not qualified, wasn't paying attention. In fact, on this stretch of highway, we had a state trooper killed by a truck that was driven by a human and drifted across the fog line a few months later. So, and because we did this, then they went to Ohio, and they're working in Ohio now, and so we need in the public sector. The problem in the public sector, and you all need to remember this, people say, why can't you be innovative in the public sector? Well, I talk to a lot of tech people. I have a lot of friends who are tech, like CEOs or executives, and they always tell me, you know what I tell my people? I say, fail, but fail quickly, right? So if you got this idea, throw some money at it, but just get out of it if it's not going to be a good idea. I've worked for 3 governors and 1 president. You know how many times I've been told to fail quickly or slowly? 0. 0 times, because what happens in the public sector when you fail, right? Then I'm up here trying to say, hey, do you want the former executive director of CDOT to come speak? So we need to create a culture of safety around these things. Smart trucking, Dean's talked a lot about this. We have the first autonomous crash truck. Smart pavement, Dean talked about the trucks and the big battery. Well, we are doing a deployment this year in Colorado around inductive charging coils in the pavement. So you can already do this on buses where you park it in the barn for the night and it sits over a coil that will charge the battery. We're talking about working probably with Denver International to put these inductive coils in the pavement as you drive to the airport. And maybe there's a model whereby you can charge all these vehicles, so you don't need a 10,000-pound battery. You don't have to worry about range anxiety. You can just charge your vehicle as you're driving around. I skipped over the Hyperloop One slide. We're a finalist in the Hyperloop One Global Challenge. We had a big announcement with Arrivo, which also uses Hyperloop technology. Very different models. Hyperloop One, 600 miles an hour. Arrivo, more of a regional approach at a much slower speed. Very complementary. But as I look out to 2050, I would say that what you see now in terms of transportation is not what it will look like in 2050. Bicycle pedestrian challenges. When I look at the fatalities on our roadways and I look into the data, serious injury crashes are actually going down. So the crashes are going down. The vehicles are engineered almost as well as it can be. There's not much more safety we can put in. Where we're seeing a huge spike in fatalities are vulnerable users, bicyclists, pedestrians, motorcyclists. And this is, people say fatalities are up 10% in Colorado. Is it marijuana? It is not marijuana. It is distracted driving. And there is no way that we are going to continue with this epidemic of distracted driving. That's, I think, the biggest reason we need to push. And then these are my daughters. I always end with this slide because I deal with much tougher crowds. My job is not a popularity contest, and this picture tends to humanize me a bit. But this is the reason I am such an evangelist for this, because when my daughters, who are 4 and 2, turn 16, I don't want them making the same dumb decisions that I made when I was that age. My parents, who are aging out of driving, I want them to have the mobility, and people with disability, this can really free them up. So I'll stop there, and I'll look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Intro, just go.
Well, let me give the introduction. So look at Bruce's bio, and you see this is a New York technology guru with
Forbes,
yeah. Head of Forbes Technology. So really steeped in this futuristic stuff, and then he leaps to go to work for the futuristic company. He will someday star in the Hyperloop movie. The Hyperloop, I can't wait for the Hyperloop movie. It features Elon Musk. It has a guy named Bam Brogan, who his wife is Bambi and their son is Elvis. And you can read about that. And then Bruce. So Bruce, the movie's going to be fantastic.
Oh, yeah. It'll be very fast.
And Richard Branson, too.
Can I do the voiceover for it?
Yeah.
There was a loop. It was hyper. Tell us about it, Bruce.
Yeah, it's a sexy story. So yeah, I was and Parag Kursi, you stole my map. This is my opening map. Yeah, so I was a journalist at Forbes for 20 years, wrote about the Hyperloop industry as it emerged a couple years ago, and then was so obsessed with it I left media to join Hyperloop One in LA. We're a transportation startup to do communications and kind of just share the story and connect with audiences like you all and other industry partners. Because Hyperloop is a, I don't know how many you know what Hyperloop is? That's actually not bad. Yeah, it's usually 30 to 50%. Anyway, I've got a video, I'll show it to you. But anyway, I wanted to start with this because we're talking about intercity travel, not interstellar travel, but intercity travel, and the way we live now, which, as Parag was talking about, the boundaries and borders of states and countries are not what we think they are. And we now live much further than we used to from our place of work. There's this thing called Marchetti's constant. It's an economic theory, I guess, but it holds up pretty well. Since the Paleolithic era, people would live 30 minutes from their place of work. Could be a hunting ground on their feet. And then as technology evolved, things got faster. People would live further and further away, but they still remain that 30-minute commute. Now it's stretching to the breaking point. A third of people in New York and Boston and Philly have a 2-hour commute every day. And you can see these regions, the colors represent how kind of the catchment area for work. So Shailen, you can see that kind of dark green where Denver is. That whole front range is just exploding in all directions, well, up north, south. And I believe Colorado Springs is, in the next 25 years, will have more people than Denver area. But people commuting from Colorado Springs to Denver, that's a pretty long commute. So we think at Hyperloop One that there should be transportation in the image of how we live, which means getting longer distances in the same amount of time. So, so what is Hyperloop? So basically, it's a pod that's sized for about 40 people or freight in an air-evacuated tube propelled by an electric motor, non-contact, that is super energy efficient because we're only powering the segments where the pod sits. So there could be, for a 100-mile distance, there may be 15 miles of propulsion. So you're accelerating at a nice gradual rate, maybe 0.25 Gs, which is equal to a plane taking off, a passenger jet taking off. And then we pull the air out of the tube, not all of it, but most of it, gets down to a very low pressure equal to about 200,000 feet above sea level. So planes burn a lot of energy to get up there to where the air is thin, and we bring that air down to about 10 feet above the ground, 12 feet above the ground on columns. And once the pod takes off, it levitates. So we have no contact with the track and minimal aerodynamic resistance. That's how you get the energy benefits and speeds of 600 miles an hour. We don't have to go that fast, but it's interesting to go fast. And the better part is this software that wraps it all up. So it's fully autonomous, no drivers, no flight attendants, and it leaves all the time. So it's changing the way we think about our timetables. Right now we go to the train station, we have to wait 40 minutes, stare at the board, get some bad coffee, a donut, or the airport, you have to get there an hour and a half before sometimes, and navigate traffic to get there. The point is just to go whenever you're ready to go. And that's what we're hoping to enable. So the space that we operate in is the future. I mean, our goal is to have the first systems in operation in about 5 years or less. But the future looks like this, or the present looks like this, I should say. So this is time on the bottom and distance on the top. This is just kind of what the potential is. High-speed rail is about 100 meters a second. You can go roughly 2,000 kilometers in 8 hours. A business jet, obviously, you can see it, you have to get to the airport. That's why that line starts so far off to the right, whereas a car, you just walk to your driveway. So basically, that line is what you can do today. That's the optimal curve. In the future, we'll have things like autonomous vehicles, which can go a little bit faster, trucks, tighter together, like you said, platooning cars too, and VTOL, Uber-type, elevate, take off from the top of a building, go to another nearby town, and that'll be close by. And then supersonic air, obviously very fast, but you have to get to the airport, or maybe a special airport that they build for those kinds of jets. So again, in the future, the line will shift to the left and look a little better. But that's the realm of possibility. So we are over to the left, that purple area, because a Hyperloop station ideally should be city center or close by, a Penn station. So maybe it takes 15, 20 minutes to get there and load pretty quickly. And you don't have to go 600 miles an hour. You can go 400 and still be in that interesting area. So, and you can do all that at an energy cost that's, better than high-speed rail. Just kind of click through that really quick. No matter how fast you go, it gets actually better than the faster you go. So that's it. So it's real. We built a 500-meter test track in Nevada, and we're working with great states like Colorado to work on feasibility studies for certain corridors. Dean asked me to put some maps into this deck, so I've got a lot of maps coming. Anyway, these are where we're doing projects, about 4 in the U.S. and 4 outside the U.S. And the idea is to bring cities closer together, so to completely collapse the barrier of distance between New York and Boston, or Chicago, St. Louis, or St. Louis, Kansas City, or LA, Vegas, so you don't even think about it. It's 20 minutes away. It's a metro stop. It's like going across town. And that creates all kinds of benefits, both by absorbing the growth that we're going to be witnessing on the trucks, on the roads with trucks and rail, by providing another option, and a faster option, and also allowing people to move to where they might get a better job, or move to a town where the housing costs are a little bit lower. A place like Manchester, England is 25% of the cost of London, and if there were to be a Hyperloop between the two, you could easily commute and stay within that Marchetti constant. Or, you know, something like between Helsinki and Tallinn, they're talking about excavating a tunnel between the two cities under the ocean there, or the sea. You may not need to build a billion-dollar cancer center in one city if another city that's suddenly 10 minutes away is building one. So you get a lot more economic rationalism within regions. So this is one route that we're pursuing with the government of Finland from Helsinki. This is like a long-term plan. It would involve the longest undersea tunnel in the world, but it would start within southern Finland. And then you go out to 2050, and you're looking at a pan-European network, a super Nordic region that connects Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and through Germany, Poland, you know, the Rail Baltica line that some of you might know about that's going up through the Baltics. And it can really create a lot more economic and political cohesion in a part of Europe that Brussels is concerned about, you know, kind of that's migrating to the east. A project that's probably what could be our first one is in the Emirates, connecting Dubai, a portion of Dubai, but then eventually extending down to Abu Dhabi. This is a brutal commute if anyone has ever done it. It's a crowded road, about 4,000 cars a day, some of them going like 1,000 miles an hour. You have to get off the highway sometimes. But the idea would be to eliminate that, to create a 12-minute intercity link. And then eventually, it could become a pan-GCC network, in which I think the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is very interested in. They're building a $500 million or billion-dollar city up in the northeast corner. They want to build a new Dubai up near Jordan and Egypt. And that would be, the only way to get to there would be a plane right now. You know, again, this is a part of the world that, like you said, does not have a competitive supply chain. Dubai has a great airport, great ports, but once you get inland, not as good as America. Another one we're looking at, we just signed 2 feasibility studies in India this week, actually with the states of Maharashtra and Karnataka, which is, Maharashtra is where Mumbai is. Again, they're facing much more wicked growth problems than we are, and congestion problems. And they're very eager to leapfrog, as they did with cellular, to a digital electric technology like Hyperloop. Again, it would evaporate the distance between Mumbai and Pune. And then again, so pan-Indian network. This is what so with 3 states now, Andhra Pradesh, which is a new state in the southeast near Chennai, Bangalore to Mumbai, you could create a new Suez Canal, essentially come from China to the east coast of India, put a container on a Hyperloop, and be on the west coast of India in less than 2 hours. Again, Colorado. So Colorado is again very progressive state. They were very early in identifying this is a very good opportunity. Anything vertical and relatively flat would make for a good corridor. And so we're looking at that Greeley to Denver area for a Hyperloop. Again, it's the right of way we're looking at is you know, it's an alternative. Like you said, widening a freeway is an option, but it's becoming almost an impossible option for a lot of cities. Witnessed in LA, they've been trying to widen the 710 from the ports of LA Long Beach, and it's just nowhere to go. The community is against it. There's no land, but there is rights of way along rail. 2050, a national U.S. network. We've been talking to some partners in Mexico as well. They're very eager to connect Mexico City to Querétaro, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and Guadalajara. And then here you go. Here's the new interstate highway system of the future, and you can get anywhere to anywhere in the U.S. in 5 hours or less. But ideally, you're really talking about just going from one city to the next city in 30 minutes, like their metro stops.
Yep. Let's reflect on what Bruce just said. I mean, if we were sitting here in 1903, which is when the Wright brothers did their Kitty Hawk thing, and Bruce stood up and said, here's the interstate highway network. It's all paved, all these signals. We got the lights, say 10-minute delay, and it'll all be in place by 1960, 1970. The groom would have just laughed their heads off. But we're talking about a super bold idea. We've had super bold ideas in the past, canals, railroads, Panama Canal. But when we get right down to it, somebody's got to build the first one. I think you've said that's probably Dubai. But if you think about, I was the network strategy guy for a big railroad that had a lot of capital, Warren Buffett money, 22,000 miles, and we could go build stuff on it right away. But to do that was very, very hard, and we owned it already because of the NIMBYism, the skepticism, some of the internal. But assuming it works, assuming the speeds are there, and assuming, let's say, Colorado is the place to do it, what's the practical reality of building Hyperloop on a right-of-way in Chicago? What do you need to make to kind of bring things together in terms of community support, involvement, putting the right-of-way together to kind of pull this thing off the ground? What are going to be some of the things that happen? And Shailen can comment too.
Yeah, so it's definitely, it's not an insignificant engineering challenge and a political challenge. I totally agree. That's probably a bigger challenge for us than the technology itself. But there are ways to do it. I mean, we've talked to folks in Texas, in Florida, in Germany, in the Netherlands, and they have all identified optimal rights of way. And it could be next to a highway. The good thing about a Hyperloop versus a high-speed rail is we take a lot less land, so we could put something in the median. We could put something on the side of a freeway. Fortunately, in a lot of these states, the development rights are under this control of the state. Sometimes, I mean, it depends where you are. So ideally, if we're partnering with the DOT, we could use the highways. Now, if you're a railroad, I mean, a BNSF or UP, some of them don't see us as a competitor, but as a partner, as an option. Yep. You know, they can get into the same business as FedEx or UPS, and look at the rise of e-commerce is really influencing a lot of business models in the logistics business. So you've got, BNSF has all that rights of way. You could put a Hyperloop there. I'm just saying, you know.
Yep.
Yeah, and
It's got to be an established, you're not going to be able to piece it together. It's got to be an established linear right away. That's maybe go ahead, Shailen.
Well, I just think that the challenge is not the engineering. Engineering makes everything possible.
Yeah.
The limiting factor we have is money. So when I was at USDOT, we had the Recovery Act, a $1 trillion stimulus package, and DOT got $8 billion for high-speed rail. And $8 billion sounds like a lot of money, but it isn't. And the reason they're going to probably go to Dubai first is because they're flush with cash, and they can go and build it. And
it's relatively flat.
And relatively flat. No, but even those engineering challenges, a lot easier to build in the eastern plains of Colorado because it's flat. Yeah, although the farmers tend to have shotguns.
Yeah.
But technology-wise, I mean, we've talked about adding a new rail line in the eastern plains, and kind of hard to go to public meetings where they're like, over your dead body, and I mean that literally, will you bifurcate my land? Well, with Hyperloop, you can suspend it, you can put it up in the air, and maybe still allow cattle to graze or whatever's going to go on. But I just come down to this idea, and this to me is the challenge for America in the 21st century, is the interstate system, the rail network gave us a competitive advantage over many other countries in the 20th century, which is why post-World War II, actually even before World War II, America was the preeminent country in the world when it came to commerce. And India, forget about the Hyperloop, is building a golden quadrilateral to connect all their major cities by highway. They're investing in rail. China, huge amounts of investment in infrastructure. Brazil is building infrastructure because they've looked at it and said that that's a competitive advantage that we want. And we've got to get out of this mindset of government should not be funding infrastructure. Government needs to be in the infrastructure business. So I would say money is the biggest challenge.
Yep. I was at the visioning session for Hyperloop in New Delhi, and there's a different perspective there, which I found fascinating. And it's not about connecting existing cities, it's about creating new cities. So Mumbai and New Delhi each have 25 million people, and the idea of doubling the size of those mega cities in the next 33 years, which is what all the urbanization trends would tell you, is just unfathomable. So they actually were thinking, I could actually create a distributed network, a set of satellite cities. The farmers are still going to be 30, or the workers can still get in 30 minutes, but they're at their farm or their local community. And that was kind of where the light bulbs seemed to go on with them. So the idea of some of these new speed, and it's happening, we're fortunate finally to get 2 privately funded high-speed rail systems off the ground, Brightline in Florida, and then Texas, the Japanese-funded line between Houston and Dallas is probably has a good idea. But that will create new urban centers within 30 minutes of those cities in very low-cost, rural land. Do you see those opportunities that developing countries could actually? That's a real estate play that's going to fund the money that's going to be needed because someone's going to take farmland and create, billions of dollars of new real estate.
For sure. I mean, McKinsey took a look at some of these ideas of transit-oriented development on a regional scale, and the values are in the billions that could pay for the infrastructure. That's how Hong Kong built its subway. Each extension that they build, they're fortunate to own the land as a state, so they create a consortium and build commercial residential real estate above the station, and that the increase in value in the development fees pay for the infrastructure. When you're fortunate to have a greenfield situation like in India or China where you can build a new city, or Saudi Arabia, the idea is to keep it compressed and around transit, and then access some other big commercial center, so as not to sprawl like we did in LA or Texas, where everyone gets their own plot of land and it's low density. We need to start building smarter, dense, these hubs where people can live affordably, and it has that new urbanism feel to it, so there's downtowns. You're seeing some of that happening in north of the Dallas Metroplex, near the airport. There's a lot of professionals that just have settled there because they want to be near the airport, and the developers have had to go up there and build urban features to make them feel like they're in a city even though they're not. People don't want, people keep talking about cities are the new thing and everyone going to the city, but actually suburbs are gaining market share over the cities, and we need to really build transit for that.
Question for Shailen. I love your point about it's insane trying to speculate what will be like in 2050. And that leads us to identifying, as you see in the little write-up, the idea of dueling narratives. We heard a bunch of those yesterday. So will autonomous cars be a complement to transit, or will they kill transit? Will autonomous cars increase sprawl or increase densities? The one I wanted to bring up here, which you'll see this in the list in the little white paper for Shailen, particularly in your new role, is so many of the tech folks you talked to in Silicon Valley said, I don't need no infrastructure from you, government. I'm going to just put all the cameras and LiDAR and sensors and work with the cloud. Just give me 5G communications, and I can solve all these problems. I don't need to wait for states and federal governments to do it, and I can do it without infrastructure. Versus an ITS, which I think is founded on the idea that there is an infrastructure play from the state and federal and local level. How do you come out on that dueling narrative of heavy infrastructure around the highways and so forth to make autonomous vehicles viable versus they can basically be truly autonomous and they're smart enough with the cameras and so forth?
So I think I am viewed as a progressive government guy, and I guess I'm going to leave government now. But sort of these early adopters or whatever. And but if you think about dealing with government, oh my God, what a nightmare! By the time you get a rulemaking out, or by the time you enact a policy, the technology is already advanced, and government is the biggest impediment to all of this stuff. And so the sort of era we find ourselves in now is the tech companies and the OEMs are all saying, get the hell out of our way, let us do something. But I promise you, something bad is going to happen, right? So something bad will happen, whether it's cybersecurity or technology goes awry and 6 people get killed in an autonomous crash, right? And we tend to have different tolerances for mass casualty events not involving guns. So if there was 6 people involved in a technology-related crash, what you would see is this flip from, oh my God, get government out of the way, to, oh my God, what idiot in government let these companies do this to us? And you'll see this flip. You've seen it with Uber, right? So Uber was like, we'll go in and we don't need government, and look at what happened in Austin and other places. So there needs to be a collaboration between government entities who actually own the infrastructure and technology companies who want to operate there, because the public demands safety. And when I was the secretary in Delaware, we'd work with the big banks. And the big banks, and I looked at all their security information and what they had laid out around some of these multinational transaction hubs that they had, and those have been hacked. So the idea that transportation won't get hacked, that somehow Honda or Chrysler or Mercedes or any of these OEMs are going to be unhackable in this era, just does not make sense to me at all. And so when that bad thing happens and things slip, you'll come back to that idea of government needs to be involved.
Good one. Well, let's open it up to the audience. We have a fair amount of time, I think, for some questions.
And I have a mobility challenge. I have a flight to LA
Yeah.
at 2:20 from Newark, so I will stick around as long as I can, but I gotta.
I think it's 5 of 12 if I'm reading my watch, so you're probably good for 15 minutes, maybe?
Yeah.
Who's got the air taxi on call, the helicopter?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, you leave when you need to.
Thank you.
Bern Grush.
Thank you. My question is for Bruce, and it's a question of scale. We're all very excited about these technologies, but we also know that in the background, populations are growing, we're moving more people into cities, we're getting wealthier, demanding more mobility, and so forth. The Hyperloop, one tube carries on the order expected of about 3,000 per hour, and the assumption is, if you don't read between the lines, is to be a tube going in each direction. I'm just thinking about San Francisco to LA, you'd probably need like 10 or 15 tubes in each direction to really knock off that congestion. So has anybody thought about how many parallel tubes you might need to get past the Dean pointed out that rail's like 6%, or I can't remember how much of our transportation is on rail now. If Hyperloop is going to take 10 or 15 or 20% of our travel intercity, how many tubes will be required? Is anybody looking?
Yeah, that's a good question. Good luck,
Thank
Shailen.
you, Shailen.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, so tacky.
If we had a Hyperloop to Newark, you could sit right
know.
here.
It's not a problem for Colorado anyway.
So, to your question, I don't think we need more than a tube each way, unless you're talking about the Northeast corridor. But even then, our models are 10,000 passengers per hour or per direction, like a intercity rail or a commuter rail. We can play with the headways, change the capacity of the tubes. Or the pods can be reformatted to be standing, like a subway, so you can fit more people in there rather than a business class or coach class experience. There's plenty of volumes with just one tube each way.
By the way, the capacity of Hyperloop is often not mentioned enough. That's the most impressive thing. When you are shooting a pod every 6 seconds, do the math. 40 people divided by 6 seconds divided by 24 hours is massive volume. If you're doing one container, which is the concept, every 6 seconds, it's massive capacity. That's what appeals to me as it actually could have the capacity of a rail system. Yeah. The trick is to how do you load the gun every 6 seconds is one of the challenges.
Yeah, I think 6 seconds might be a little aggressive.
The stations are pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think I might have said 10,000 per hour. I meant per day, by the way, just to fact check that.
Okay.
Over the past century, we've seen these linear surface transit corridors evolve.
Yep.
We had a dirt road, then we paved the road, and it was 2 lanes, then it went from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, 4 lanes to 6 lanes, then we had a shoulder, then we put up sound abatement walls, and nobody ever talks about kind of especially with east-west transit corridors, kind of the species collapse that has occurred because of that. Because most species, migrate north-south with the seasons, and that's how they mate. And we've had massive ecological, species collapse across the world, and nobody really, other than Eric Sanderson last night, talks about it. Hyperloop is one of these interesting cases because it's actually elevated. By design, it seems to be elevated. Is that a sales point? Is that part of your analysis? Because I could pull up from my my biogeography friends all the ecoregions map of the United States and all the species and what their migratory corridors are. And when we build a highway or an interstate, we're literally just transecting an ecoregion and saying, sorry, animals, whatever. But Hyperloop seems to have, this extra ecological benefit if we elevated all of our east-west mobility. Or is that just a weird Chris Tucker thing and nobody talks about that?
No, I mean, the elevated is a strategic, has strategic value. I mean, A, it's safer to separate from grade, less interference with first responders, school buses, just people waiting for the train to go by, and just avoiding collisions. So because in the tube, you also avoid weather hazards as well. But it's also cheaper than tunneling. I mean, you could go faster and straighter if you tunneled everywhere, but it would cost 6 times more than building at grade. So going up is only 2 to 3 times more than grade.
It's also, my experience with high-speed rail is, which also can be elevated, it's a huge selling point for the rural areas. So the biggest battle that the Dallas to Houston faced was the farmers in the middle saying, you can't have my cattle not be able to get across my land. So it's true not just for wild species, but for domesticated species. But once they said, wait a minute, it's elevated, you can get back and forth, some of that died down.
Helped, yeah. And the farmers driving their tractors and combines underneath.
Hello, my name is Iman. I'm an undergrad student at CUNY Hunter College.
Could you speak up a bit more?
Sorry, Hyperloop question. Assuming we have a Hyperloop in place, assuming that it's just as cost competitive with air travel, can we assume a general decrease in short travel air dependency? Would that go away?
Yeah, I mean, that would be our natural, the mode shift would be from air, if you're talking about LA to Vegas. We wouldn't be competing with New York to San Francisco anytime soon, this century, because it's too long to build a tube, just too much, it's not comfortable, you might as well just get to the airport. But yeah, they saw it with high-speed rail, you saw it in Spain, Madrid to Barcelona, when they built that, everyone took the train instead. I think in Japan or in Korea, they stopped flying between some of the cities entirely. Because the mode shift to rail was just a lot more attractive for people. Does that answer your question? Is that what you're talking about?
I was just assuming it is cost comparative. Is it actually?
It'll be cheaper. It'll be cheaper. That's our financial models. We're trying to attract private capital to these projects to get around the problem that Shailen, is all too aware of, is the reluctance to fund publicly. But these would be highly profitable routes, given the likelihood of both mode shift and induced demand, people just suddenly deciding to take a trip that they wouldn't have otherwise. You go to check out a new restaurant in Boston and be back in time just to go to bed.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carter Waterkeen. I'm an AP Human teacher from St. Petersburg, Florida. My question is about social equity. This was mentioned a couple times for you guys. We have a ton of old people where I'm from, and as they start to get too old to drive, this is a terrifying thing for them. I believe it was the guy that left, actually, but these seem like opportunities to really help these people, as well as impoverish people, where in Florida, the first question that's asked to somebody in a low-end job is, do you have reliable transportation? Because there basically isn't a city in the Southeast that has a good public transit system. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the idea of accessibility for underserved, and it could be the disabled who can't drive today, the inebriated who shouldn't drive, the elderly who need to get around, and even kids who have to do all kinds of things as well. But most importantly is the big population of the around the world, people that just don't leave their town because there's nothing, if they don't have a motorcycle or get in a big bus or something, there's nothing to do, so nowhere to go. So the idea of the mobility and access to human opportunities, whether it's jobs or seeing relatives, could really change if this transportation as a service becomes so much lower cost, as we heard it could be yesterday. And that's not necessarily going to be a single, it may not be a 4-person, 5-person passenger vehicle, it may be a minibus. And that may be the blending that we see of transit, big buses or even big rail, heavy rail could move to on-demand, smaller minibuses at a much lower price. And you would have, using the existing highway infrastructure, you could have a vastly increased access and mobility for all kinds of things that people want to do. The counter-argument is it would create, there's pent-up demand, and you'll actually increase the passenger miles traveled which then adds congestion. So there'll be an interesting dynamic between creating so much new value with better mobility, better access, that we actually, and with population growth, that we actually choke on ourselves. You know the old adage about build a new lane in the road and it fills up? Well, same kind of thing. We're just going to create more demand. There's pent-up demand that'll be out there. So that balancing act of the dynamics, again, is going to be something very interesting to watch. But the opportunity for equity is huge by taking the cost down. And I don't know if you heard it yesterday, but if it could be free. So if Disney wants to entertain you and actually route you for 45 minutes so you can see the Disney movie, and you do it for free, or take you to the gambling casino or whatever, transportation service could actually end up being situationally could be free.
Great, thank you, Dean.
Yep.